I think native advertising is a perfectly legitimate piece of thinking. Advertising is a continuum, isn't it? It starts off as you're blasting a message out, you're telling people that you're great. Yeah. You can work towards sponsorship, which is a deeper engagement and a better connection with the brand that you're working with. And you can work into, and many advertising partners get into events and work where they're associating with the brand that they're working with increasingly closely. And then at the top end, or at the far end of that continuum, just before you get to PR, is a place where native actually takes place. Now, this is a delicate subject actually. So if you're sponsoring BBC editorial, then you won't be influencing what's being written. Yeah. So it needs to be very clear to the consumer, and indeed this is operated in print for many a long year. It's actually nothing new really, it's just been rebranded and has made a bit of a comeback. Well, it's true. If you look at the International Herald Tribune, for instance, you can get this article brought to you in association with has been running for donkey's years. And so what needs to be very clear, if it's to have any credibility with the audience, and that's the important thing, is that you're not trying to fool them into thinking that they're reading something which they're not. Oh, the BBC's saying this. Why is the BBC promoting this product? Because we wouldn't do that. But it isn't illegitimate. So it's not really a question of whether you should do it or not. It's rather more a question of how you do it. Yeah. And I think also the native world needs to say to the marketeer that and the lesson, this comes the other way from the public relations thing. Most of this is about the how. If you just put out a press release which is not very interesting, guess what? You don't get much coverage. So if you just do a native advertising piece, which is really just a bit of marketing puff and doesn't actually have any intrinsic value, don't be surprised if the consumers aren't particularly impressed and you don't get much readership and you get a lot of visits but not very many page views. Yeah. What's actually really the actual neat piece about native advertising is it's perfectly legitimate to do high quality content which actually is associated with a particular brand. You see it appear in many different ways. You see it appear through Red Bull, for instance. Yeah, they've done superb content and have actually got generated it themselves and done good content. Now, there's an interesting question as to whether that content, as it stands, would go on to a premium publisher such as the BBC. But there's certainly another thing where you would argue that there's no reason why there shouldn't be a supply of content which is something which you're not necessarily already covering and is also to the right standard and is also appropriate for the audience, because the media owner has to be careful that they don't bring their own product into disrepute by putting all kinds of stuff on the site which isn't really relevant to the audience you're serving. So we have a native advertising program. We've had a series of advertisers so far. We've done things like that more from the editorial side for a whole lot of years. So those opportunities are there with us. It requires a degree of sophistication and a backwards and forwards exchange between the advertiser and the media owner, which is more time, more trouble, more effort, and than perhaps just buying regular advertising is. And that actually diminishes the number of people who ultimately want to do it. But we're very keen to engage in that area, and we have done several times.
I think what you current partners or prospect partners can do. The other thing that's important is the revolution that I saw at CES last week is coming with a change in distribution of how consumers are going to touch video and how publishers are going to be able to monetize video. And it's everything from the networks, the cable companies, the device companies.